You already know the story of Peter walking on water. You've heard it in sermons, seen it in paintings, maybe even quoted it yourself, but you've been reading it as a miracle story. It's an instruction manual, a precise step-by-step diagram of what happens when you hold an internal assumption against the full weight of physical evidence telling you it's wrong. And the mechanics of how Peter sank reveal something about your own mind that most people never connect. The setup matters more than people give it credit for. The disciples are in a boat. Middle of the night. A storm is raging. The waves are high, the wind is against them, and they've been rowing for hours. Then they see a figure walking toward them across the water. They're terrified. They think it's a ghost. And Jesus says two words that carry the entire allegory. Be not afraid. That phrase does heavy lifting. Fear is the first thing addressed, before the miracle, before the invitation, before anything else. Because fear and assumption cannot occupy the same space. You can hold a belief about who you are, what you deserve, what's coming for you. But the moment fear floods in, that belief dissolves like salt in the storm. The allegory establishes this up front. Fear is the solvent. Peter responds with something strange. He says, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water." Notice the structure of that sentence. Peter already sees the figure. He already suspects who it is. But he asks for a command, an external permission to act on what he internally senses is true. And this mirrors something you've done dozens of times. You've had a conviction, a gut-level sense of direction, and instead of acting on it, you looked for someone else to confirm it first. Peter needed to hear "come" before he'd step over the edge. The word arrives. Come, one syllable. And Peter steps out of the boat. This is the moment the allegory sharpens into something uncomfortably precise. Peter is now standing on water. The thing that cannot hold him is holding him. Every law of physics he's ever experienced says he should be underwater. His feet are wet, the surface is unstable, the wind is still blowing, the waves are still moving. Every single sensory input is screaming that this is impossible, and yet he's standing. What's keeping him up? The text says he's looking at Jesus. His attention is fixed on the figure ahead of him. His assumption, "I was called, I can walk here, this surface holds me," is louder than the counter-evidence. The water under his feet, the spray on his face, the howling wind, all of it is real. All of it is telling him the truth about water, and he's choosing a different truth. He's selecting an assumption and weighting it above direct sensory experience. This is where it stops being a Sunday school story and starts being operational. Think about any assumption you've ever tried to hold. A new identity, a career shift, a belief that you deserve something you've never had. The moment you committed to it, what happened? Everything around you started producing evidence against it. Your bank account said otherwise. People who knew the old version of you reflected that old version back. Your own habits contradicted the new image. The storm didn't stop when Peter stepped out of the boat. The storm is the point. The allegory says, explicitly, that the conditions will remain hostile while you walk. Peter takes several steps. The text doesn't say how many, but he's walking, on water, in a storm. And then the critical failure point. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, "Lord, save me." He saw the wind. He transferred his attention from the figure ahead of him to the conditions around him. His senses won. The assumption cracked. And the water which had been holding him instantly responded to his revised belief. He began to sink. The surface didn't change. The water was the same water. His belief about the water changed, and the water's behavior followed. The sequence is surgical. Assumption held. Surface solid. Attention shifted to contradictory evidence. Surface liquid. The physical world conformed to whichever internal state Peter occupied. And the text presents this as cause and effect, not coincidence. Jesus reaches out, catches him, and says something that translates roughly to, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" The Greek word for doubt there, distazo, means to waver between two positions, to stand in two places at once. Peter's failure was binary attention. He tried to hold the assumption and process the counter-evidence simultaneously. The allegory says you can't. You get one or the other, the assumption fully committed, or the evidence fully accepted. The middle ground is where you sink. And this maps onto something you can test in your own experience right now. Remember a time you decided something about yourself? Truly decided, with full internal weight behind it. and the world rearranged to match. A job you walked into knowing you'd get. A relationship where you carried a quiet certainty. The external details cooperated in ways that felt almost suspicious. Now remember a time you held that same kind of decision but kept checking the evidence. Kept looking at your bank balance, your age, your track record. The doubt crept in through the senses and the whole thing collapsed. Same person, same capability. The variable was where attention landed. The boat in this allegory deserves its own examination. The boat is the known world. It's stable, it's familiar, it has walls. Everyone else stayed in it. The other disciples watched Peter walk and watched Peter sink, and they never left the boat. The boat is the life you can explain to other people, the career that makes sense on paper, the relationship that checks the boxes, the identity that your family recognizes. Stepping out of the boat means occupying a position that has no visible support, and doing it anyway because the internal command was specific. Peter didn't jump into random water. He was called to a specific spot. The assumption has to be specific too. Vague hopes dissolve on contact with reality. Things will get better sinks immediately. I am walking toward that figure, on this water, right now. That has enough specificity to displace the sensory counter-evidence. The allegory insists on precision. There's a detail most readings skip over entirely. After Jesus pulls Peter up and they both get into the boat, the storm stops. The wind ceases. The text says the disciples worshipped him, saying, "Of a truth, thou art the Son of God." The conditions changed after the demonstration, after the walk, after the sinking and rescue. The storm was never the obstacle. The storm was the testing environment. It existed to produce the counter-evidence that the assumption had to override. Without the storm, walking on water is just walking on a calm lake. Unusual, sure, but the allegory requires hostility. It requires the senses to be fully loaded with contradictory data, because that's the only condition under which maintaining an assumption means anything. A belief that's comfortable to hold is just an opinion. A belief maintained against screaming opposition from every nerve ending in your body, that's faith in the mechanical sense. The allegory defines faith as a sustained attention lock on an invisible instruction, while visible reality argues against it with everything it has. And the sinking is part of the design. Peter sank, he failed the test, and the text doesn't condemn him for it. It diagnoses the failure with clinical precision. You wavered, you split your attention, you let the senses override the command. The correction is equally precise. Look at me, step again. The water will hold. The allegory assumes you'll sink. It assumes the senses will win, at least the first few times. The rebuke is gentle because the failure is expected. The instruction is simply to reach out, get pulled back up, and fix your attention again. The water doesn't remember that you sank. The surface resets the moment your assumption resets. You felt this. That moment when you're 3 weeks into a new commitment and everything around you is still reflecting the old pattern. The bills still look the same. The mirror still shows the same face. The people around you still expect the version of you from 6 months ago. Every sense is telling you that nothing has changed. And the allegory says, keep your eyes forward. The surface holds as long as the assumption holds. The storm is supposed to be there. The counter-evidence is the curriculum. The boat is still behind you. The other disciples are still watching. The wind is still blowing. The only question the allegory asks is where your eyes are pointed.